The clustering as a concept actually is not new to India, right? So we've been seeing quite a few clusters that have come up. So whether we talk about food parks, we talk about parks that are specifically set up for for automotive and automotive components, or for plastics or toys recently, or furniture. So clustering has taken off really in a big way, because I think there are significant benefits coming out of clustering, right? So to name a few, we have seen supply chain management improvements, right? Which mean that if you aggregate several companies' requirements, you can actually have a good fleet operator or a set of fleet operators who kind of bring the materials in and they take materials out, right? Or if you talk about even resource pooling for that matter, you can have resources which are manpower resources that are kind of pooled in, and they can be used and they can be deployed across different companies, right? Essentially, also, if you look at economies of scale from a developer perspective, there are several economies that can be leveraged, right? Which means that if you look at, say, the STP or the water supply or the electricity or the sewage treatment plants, when you have a cluster of similar natured companies, they would be able to provide better services and facilities to the occupants, rather than having very disparate levels of service and disparate levels of facilities that you would need to establish if they were very, very different natured companies, right? Plus, I think one of the key benefits which accrue to companies which come together in a clustered approach is that of collaboration, right? So companies can learn of each other, in terms of manufacturing best practices, or whether it is with regard to AI deployment, or it is with regard to, say, using Six Sigma, or it's with regard to skill development, right? There is a lot of collaboration that comes together, and there is a significant amount of leverage that we have seen when companies come together in a cluster. And also from a holistic development, you see that when there is a lot of interaction of companies in a cluster, you have significant amount of conversations that happen, and it also helps to make the industry grow. So whether it is with regard to industry representations, or it is with regard to industries discussing common problems, or even solutions, I think clustering as a concept is here to stay and to definitely grow. Right? It is very important that when you have data, you can then look about improving. So there are different mechanisms when it comes to data collection, right? Starting with something very simple as, say, the water and air quality of data. We kind of keep doing that at our parks. We have installed sensors which are located at different corners of the park, which kind of tell us about the quality of the water in terms of the pH, the acidity, in terms of the effluents which are there, or in terms of the suspended particulate matter in the air itself. We kind of tell the occupants that this is the quality of the air, they need to take precautions. That's the simplest level of data which is there. Then we have a little more advances in terms of the security, in terms of who's going in and who's coming out of the park. Because security today is extremely important. With all of the IP which is there inside each of the companies, we kind of ensure that there is data around who's entering the park, who's entering the premises, so we can have a gating mechanism and to ensure that only the authorized entry is happening. Then with regard to the data on collections, or the communication which is there with all of the park occupants. So there is a very strong inbuilt CRM process which is then put into place, which helps the occupants to be able to share information about the kind of issues that they're facing, right? So we come to know at different corners of the park, if we are not around there physically, the occupants are able to then funnel back any of the information that they seek or any of the problem that they're encountering. So it becomes an information gathering exercise for us to constantly improve upon our services and deliveries to the park occupants. I think nothing beats a physical face-to-face interaction, right? For data gathering, and India, especially in the context of being part of Asia Pacific and Southeast Asia, we are a high touch culture. So we organize regular meetings every 2 months or every 3 months. We kind of call it as coalesce, wherein we reach out to the different occupants and their representatives come in and talk about what they found right. What are the things that can be improved upon. What are the kind of things that they would want us to represent to the government or to the local panchayat, or the district authorities. So that becomes a very important touch point for us to collect the data as well. So while you have electronic media and you have the sensors which are working independently, a face-to-face interaction we have found to be extremely useful. One, in strengthening our relationships, and second is being able to collect a lot of the softer points that do not get collected through the electronic or the sensor-based data collection. Do a planning exercise. The planning exercise is a very complex one. There is nothing simple about doing a planning exercise because imagine a park. So we have parks in Chennai. We've got 2 parks in Chennai. We've got one in Jaipur. We've got one in Ahmedabad. And each of these parks have required land aggregation over several years, right? When you're talking about, say, 1,500 acres or 3,000 acres of land aggregation, it takes time. So one is, to be able to do a demand assessment, of how the nature is going to be, how the industry is going to be trending upwards, in terms of what is going to be the footprint, what's going to be the demand, what is going to be the requirements of the industries that are going to come forward. So, to an extent that, we're able to give the inputs, we are able to put our heads together and do that. But at the same time, what we also do is we engage with top-notch master planning companies. So like in Mahindras, we have engaged with Jurong, which is one of the world's leading master planners from Singapore, who have helped us with the master planning exercise of our parks, right? What this has essentially done is that when you look at the park itself, a blueprint is initially created, and that blueprint essentially demarcates, various aspects of the park. So you have the industrial, which forms the bedrock. Then you have the residential, and then you have the social infra, inside which you have the entertainment, dining areas. And each of these zones are very well demarcated, right? So you don't have a blending in of either into another. So you have very, very clear right of way. You have excellent medians. You have service road capabilities. Now, this is in terms of the basic infra. Now, apart from that, since you're looking at different, coming back to the original point about clustering, there are different requirements which are there with regard to the utility planning. So there are specific areas which are then demarcated in terms of things like, your sewage treatment plants, or, you have also your UGR, which is an underground reservoir for that matter, plus the drainage system. Because, drainage, typically one is, takes it as a given. But if, for example, a very small, tiny piece of the entire planning is not devoted to good planning of the drainage itself, that itself can create a lot of nuisance to the park occupants. So the finest level of detail is then put together on the blueprint, and it comes down to the actual execution itself. So we have ensured that from the blueprint stage to the execution, and then a constant monitoring of that execution, depending on feedback that we pick up from the customers, and depending on how the industry itself evolves. Because if you take Chennai, for example, our World City in Chennai completes 20 years this year, and it is actually ranked as amongst the top industrial parks in the country. It is an excellent example of how a great planning, a great execution, and a great maintenance can sustain a very, very strong public-private partnership into transforming an absolutely barren land into being one of the most iconic parks in India, right? So the top-down is an extremely important exercise when we do a park of the magnitude that Mahindra has executed. and a continuous improvement. One is in terms of sustainable development. We have to make sure that we are very contextual. All of our sustainable exercises are incorporated. Things like renewable energy, which is now, over the last decade or so, it's really picked up very well. That's provided to all of the park residents. So these are some of the things that were initially not conceptualized, way back in 2000 when we had started on the park, but they have been integrated, and it has become more contextual, so that this park, stays on, performs extremely well for all of its park residents, and we have some of the best brands in the country which are represented at our World City. So you have companies like a BMW, a BASF, an Infosys, a Wipro, Renault, Nissan, Mahindra Research Valley, all of them are at our parks. And this has been made possible essentially from a very detailed planning and an excellent execution and a constant monitoring and a continuous improvement. So it comes down to a few things. One is the management mindset itself, right? So when you look at Mahindra as a group, we are very strongly committed to sustainable development and sustainability. So whether it comes down to greening all of our parks, plus having things like your zero waste to landfill, plus providing for renewable energy, plus educating each of the park residents in terms of recycling, and incorporating things like a sewage treatment plant, and having a constant engagement with each of the park occupants is extremely critical from a sustainable development perspective, because you have to take a long-term view. It is, sustainability is not something which is, either a 2-year or a 5-year time frame, because each of these manufacturing companies are going to be there for a very long time, right? So each of this implies that from a project developer's perspective, that means from our perspective, we have incorporated each of the pieces of the infrastructure to bring in the sustainability, right? So maybe when we had started on the park, there was a broad idea and a broader definition of what sustainability needs to be. But then over time, we have also incorporated things like your ZWL, plus greener buildings, plus providing for solar, whether it's been rooftops, or providing things like solar powered electricity. So all of these have really contributed. Or whether it is as simple things like rainwater harvesting, making sure that the roads are constantly managed well. So all of these contribute to sustainable development and sustainability, right? So education is extremely important. A constant engagement with the park, plus their cooperation across the periods of time, plus the amount of investment that the developer brings in into a cluster, becomes extremely important to drive sustainability and to ensure that sustainable development stays on, for an infinite period of time. The clustering is here to stay. We have been seeing quite a few of the companies and say developers who are now taking a position that they want to make it a fairly specialized set of clusters. So we have been seeing the government also laying emphasis on, say, the MMLP, for example, or you have the petroleum products or the plastics parks, which are very specific, or even say electronics parks. So it becomes more of a clustering approach, because clustering brings about economies of scale. It helps in very efficient supply chain management, like I was sharing earlier. Plus there is resource pooling, which the companies then can start looking at. Plus you have a common ground for making representation. So each of these become very important, and clustering will continue to be, because in terms of land aggregation, from a developer's perspective, or doing a master planning exercise, again from a developer's perspective, becomes very, very important. And clustering enables this very well to be integrated with the expectations from the sectors that are going to be using these clusters, right? So clustering is here to stay. The size of clusters might actually differ from sector to sector. So while we're looking at say the transportation and logistics, maybe looking at maybe a 50 or 100 or 150 acres of development. But there could be larger parks, say, for example, the furniture cluster, or you have a toys cluster, which are actually far larger, because then you're talking about bringing in skill development centers. You're talking about resource pooling, you're talking about integrated R&D, which means that you're going to have several facilities which are very traditional and which are going to be very focused on that sector itself. So the sector itself and the needs, whether it is with regard to the vendors who are going to come in and set it up, or with regard to the logistics that are going to support it, would be very different from sector to sector. So the clusters will be there. The sizes will differ. The kind of service offerings within the clusters will change depending on the nature of the clusters. But yes, I mean, as I look forward, clustering will be there, going forward as well.